Hey, it's Jimmy Alice, and you made it to the Where in the World is Jimmy Alice podcast. And I'm really excited about today's topic on child support. I am currently in Buffalo, New York, and I came back here to plant roots and purchase a home and become an adult because I was in a stable position and then I hit a pothole situation and it really rocked my world. Like it rocked my socks and rose colored glasses off. And I realized how codependent I was and how that's just not really working. It's like you're honestly living alongside society instead of in society, which is probably the best bet to living a life that's fulfilling. Um, and stop rebelling and dissociating. But, anyways, after the affirmations that I'm gonna hit on right now, we're gonna do current events and then we're gonna talk about my topic. And then I'm gonna read a little bit from the book of virtues. I found this book at Goodwill and there's a picture of a couple in it. So interesting. I'm gonna post and see whose picture it is. It has to be in Buffalo, New York because I bought it here. But then we'll end the podcast with gratitude. Now, I just want to add that I am only doing 12 episodes per year. And the reason is because I do other content, and you can find me on J Elizabeth on YouTube or jelizabeth.com. And soon to come, you'll be able to pre order my book. All right, so episode 1 Affirmations. I trust myself and my instincts, allowing me to make trustworthy decisions and choices. I choose to view others with empathy and kindness, understanding that everyone is fighting their own battles. I build trust by keeping my promises and following through on my commitments. The affirmations are in the show notes. So, with current events, I got the Sunday paper. It's Juneteenth today, June 19th. I'm in Buffalo, New York, and that's where we usually have like this huge Juneteenth festival. They've been doing it for almost 50 years, and I thought it was a thing that they did everywhere because I've been here my whole life, and we just been going to the festival every year. I usually loved the like step teams and or the drill teams in the basketball games, and then like of course the food because it's Buffalo, New York. We have great food here. And then for some reason, a little bit of violence breaks out. But we usually are gone by that time. And this year my children went for the first time and they did not like it. They just weren't really into it. And I'm thinking of ways to like get them back into socializing because I was homeschooling them over the pandemic. And of course, like everybody. And then the pandemic ended and I continued homeschooling. And then they went to live with their father and he continued homeschooling. And I admit, I am a little more social than their father. Like I lived in a community where there were tons of kids. Like every day after school, my son would go to his friend's house or his friends would come over to my house on the weekends, and all I would hear on the weekends is ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. So there was so much socialization, and I always prioritize living near a park so that they can socialize. Now, their dad did live near a park, but the kids were not worth socializing with because they were just a little rough around the edges. I remember when we went to the park, there was like blood on the basketball court, and one kid was saying, on the or to her friends that the girl brought a knife to the park, and it was just a lot. It was a lot. It was a lot. So it was a big shift, and now I'm getting them back into socializing with people that are worth socializing with, and it's interesting. But I'm in the Buffalo newspaper, and I saw something in the arts and entertainment section about a woman from Sacred Heart Academy, which is like a Catholic all girls school. And her career has expanded into story editing for Disney. I'm going to read it from the article. This is such a good like takeaway from her story to implement into your own. Gracie was anything but risk averse. She is a shining example for anyone who takes a career risk and follows their heart. In Gracie's case, that was deciding to work in sketch comedy and television rather than take a more traditional job. She got the comedy and writing bug at Sacred Heart, where she graduated in 1991. She was student council president and involved in the plays and the musicals Funny Girl, Annie Got to Get Your Gun, and Bye Bye Birdie. She said Miss Maloney, who taught English, was one of the two teachers that inspired her. Her latest project is being story editor of the new Disney Channel animated comedy adventure, Haley's on It. Episodes also appear on the streaming site Disney Plus. This show is described in a release as following Haley, a risk averse but resourceful teenager, on a mission to complete every item on her long list of challenging and sometimes impractical tasks in order to save the world. I love that for her. I don't know this woman. I don't know this woman, but I did go to Villa Maria Academy, which is also all girls Catholic school, and we weren't rivals, but all the all girls schools were. It was an interesting relationship. I'll just say that they called us the Villa Virgins, and they called them something else that I'm not gonna say on here. In other news, I'm just scouring through the newspaper. I used to love cutting out articles for current events in like fifth grade. There's an article about the Juneteenth festival. That's awesome. Teacher to retire after substance suspicions. Okay. Huh. Ellsberg, who leaked Pentagon Papers, dies at 92. Daniel Ellsberg, the history-making whistleblower who by leaking the Pentagon Papers revealed longtime government doubts and deceit about the Vietnam War, an inspired act of retaliation by President Richard Nixon that helped lead to his resignation, has died. He was 92. Wow. He was a Harvard graduate and self-defined Cold Warrior who served as a private and government consul on Vietnam throughout the 1960s. Risked his life on the battlefield, recovered the highest security clearances, and came to be trusted by officials in Democratic and Republican administration. He was especially valued, he would later note, for his talent for discretion. But like millions of other Americans in and out of the government, he turned against the years-long war in Vietnam. The government's claim that the battle was winnable and that a victory for the North Vietnamese over the US backed South would lead to the spread of communism through the region. Unlike most of the war opponents, he was in a very special position to make a difference. Um, the Pentagon Papers were commissioned in 1967 by the then Defense Secretary Robert S. McNamara, a leading public advocate of the war who wanted to leave behind a comprehensive history of the US and Vietnam to help his successors avoid the kinds of mistakes he will only admit to long after. Let's see what these Pentagon Papers were. The papers covered more than 20 years from France's failed efforts at colonization in the 1940s and 1950s to the growing involvement of the U.S., including bombing raids and deployment of hundreds of thousands of ground troops during Lyndon Johnson's administration. Ellsberg was among those asked to work on the study focusing on 1961 when the newly elected president John F. Kennedy began adding let me start that part over. Ellsberg was among those asked to work on the study focused on 1961 when the newly elected president John F. Kennedy began adding advisors and support units. David Halberstam, I don't know why I need to pause to say that. David Halberstam, the late author and Vietnam correspondent who knew Ellsberg since both were posted overseas, would describe him as no ordinary convert. He was highly intelligent, obsessively curious, and profoundly sensitive. A born Proselitzer, mm, a born Proselitzer who saw political events in terms of moral absolutes and demanded consequences for abuses of power. The Pentagon Papers were first published in the New York Times in 1971 with the Washington Post. They documented that the U.S. defied a 1954 settlement barring a foreign military presence in Vietnam, questioned whether South Vietnam had a viable government, secretly expanded the war to neighboring countries, and plotted to send American soldiers even as Johnson vowed he wouldn't. The Johnson administration dramatically and covertly escalated the war despite the judgment of the government's intelligence community that the measures would not weaken the North Vietnamese, wrote the Times' Neil Sheehan, a former Vietnam correspondent who later wrote a Pulitzer Prize winning book on the war. a bright, shining lie. Wow. Oof. The Nixon administration quickly tried to block further publication on the grounds of the papers would compromise national security, but the U.S. Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in favor of the news organization's June 30th, 1971, a major First Amendment ruling rejected prior restraint. Nixon himself, initially unconcerned because the papers predated his time in office, was determined to punish Ellsberg and formed a renegade team of White House plumbers endowed with a stash of White House hush money. Ellsberg faced trials in Boston and Los Angeles on federal charges for espionage and theft, with a possible sentence of more than 100 years. He expected to go to jail, but was spared in part by Nixon's rage and the excess of those around him. The Boston case ended in a mistrial. Ooh, because the government wiretap conversation between a defense witness and his attorney. Charges in the Los Angeles trial were dismissed after Judge Matthew Byrne learned that the White House plumbers, G. Gordon Liddy and E. Howard Hunt, burglarized the office of Ellsberg psychiatrist in Beverly Hills, California. Byrne ruled that the bizarre events have incurably infected the prosecution of the case. Meanwhile, the plumbers continued their crime wave. Wow. Notably, the June 1972 break in the Democratic Party's national headquarters at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, D.C. The Watergate scandal didn't prevent Nixon from landslide re-election in 1972, but would expand rapidly during his second term and culminate in his resignation in August 1974. U.S. combat troops had already left Vietnam, and North Vietnamese captured the southern capital, Saigon, in April 1975. Without Nixon's obsession with me, we would have stayed in office, Ellsberg told the Associated Press in 1999. And had he not been removed from the office, we would have continued the bombing of Vietnam. Right. Well, he passed away at 92, and I just wanted to share what was going on and currently. Um, so that's what's going on currently. On to my topic of child support. Now, there are varying perspectives on this topic, and I wanted to share mine based on my actual experience because a lot of people have he say, she say. Some people don't even have kids and they're having an opinion on it, which is interesting, which is interesting. But from firsthand experience and seeing other people go through it, I just want to say, as the parent who has the children, the custodial parent, person on the outside has to regain trust and not necessarily respect because you don't have to respect each other if you don't want to, but has to gain a level of trust in order to not be on child support. Has to prove themselves essentially. And as soon as that person starts slipping up with no communication, it's free game. So in my book, I refer to my ex-husband as EH. And yes, you can pre-order your copy of the book at jimmyalice'sarc.com. All the information will be in the show notes. So I put EH on child support in 2013 after asking him to pay half of our daycare bill for our children. And it was only $300. It was maybe like $360 a month. Um, and that was half of the bill. We were in the military, so it was just a little bit cheaper because it's based on how much you make. He didn't respond, so I took his silence as incompetence and placed him on child support while we were still married. I was essentially dealing with someone who wanted the perks of being like a husband, but lacked the skills required to manage himself and others that depended on him and his focused attention. And I have to add that part because I married him so he could make more money, so he could pour into the household, so he could have more, um, so he could shift his focus and his priorities, but he didn't. So, yeah. Recently, we were co parenting. We co parented for 6 months, and it was really great, actually. Um, I moved to his town because I was all over the East Coast, I was on the West Coast, and then I went to Europe. And then I was like, I need to come back and chill out and plant roots somewhere. So I decided to do it in his town because that's where I sent the kids. Like, he didn't request the children. I told him he had to have the children. Like, all right, I had them for 10 years now, 10, 11 years now. So it's time for you to step up and parent. Now, it was short-lived, but it was so worth the experience and the freedom, that temporary freedom that I got. That I have freedom with them, sure. But I'm the type of person, if I'm gonna do something, I feel like I should do it right. And when I had them, all of my like attention was about their livelihood, of course. And that's how it should be. But like I said, if you're going to do it, you should do it right. And for me, right is above and beyond. So they went to private school. They did activities, they had tutoring, they did other educational programs, and of course, they read books every now and then. I wasn't like super, super tough on that. I just let them go to school, and the tuition was five figures. So I know they were learning something and getting great experiences and friendships there. I also always made sure that I lived near like a park, like I said earlier, so they could have social skills and they could have community, and we could all have what we needed, all while working and going to school at the same time, so that I could have three incomes in addition to his um, very small child support payment that we started back in 2013. Now, when I started the child support payment, we weren't making that much. We were in the military, and they wanted to give me more and back pay, offer back pay. I was like, it's not that deep. I just wanted him to pay child support I just wanted him to pay half daycare. So I was like, you know what? I'll go a little over half daycare and let that be it. Because he would be struggling. He wouldn't have time for the children if I went too high. The thing is, it was never a thought in his mind to support his children physically, also, unless I set it up, or I don't know, maybe like, uh, I don't know. I don't know what his thought, I can't tell you what his thought process is. Um, but he did everything else instead of seeing them. He got them life insurance. He's a homeowner. He owns a couple of houses that they get when he passes away. He's one of those parents that want to support later. And it's like one of those hope for forgiveness approaches, I guess. But we did co-parent, and it was beautiful because I got to see his parenting style. I got to see his ebb and flow. But one of the conversations or speeches that went down that was super impactful and like so great to me was when my son was acting wild. And there was a study that says that children are 800 times worse uh, with their mothers than they are with anybody else. And it's because you can come, when you have the authority figure, you can come into the role of friend parent. And I forget what approach that is, but I'll put it in the show notes. Um, and I like that approach because they talk to me. I'm able to show them what it's like to be enjoyed. I'm able to show them what it's like to have actual attention on them. I'm able to lead them into leading themselves, because I'm not being this dictator, this authoritarian, telling them what to do, how to think, stuff like that. Like, okay, but what would you do? Um, Leading them to themselves. It's what I paid that five-figure tuition for them to learn: critical thinking skills, progressive learning. Um, I'm just into that. But he told my son, because my son was acting wild, don't take her kindness for granted. Don't take her kindness for granted, because she doesn't have to choose that. And he also said to him on another occasion, because he gave him plenty of speeches, which I loved. He gave them both speeches. He gave my daughter speeches, our daughter speeches by proxy. Like, she was just there. He wouldn't really speak to her one on one because he didn't like that she would cry. He also mentioned one day, I think I was like washing dishes or something, and the kids just wanted to talk and play. And he was telling them, well, he was telling our son that I have interests outside of them, and they're very selfish to never ask me about my interests and think that I should always pour into them. Now, my kids are not 6 and 7 anymore. My kids are not 3 and 4 anymore. They're 10 and 11. Both of them will be 11 very soon, this fall. So he wasn't wrong in mentioning that and bringing that up. And then, I watched the episode of Bluey with them that kind of just reinforced that. And he taught me how to approach speeches for them. He taught me how to approach conversations for them from an aspect of from a much more like calm angle. Because as the person choosing kindness in any situation, whether it be being lenient on the child support or being um, a, a safe space for you to tell me all the crazy stuff that you've done, even though I'm supposed to be the person that's like, why would you do that? Come get this discipline. People find themselves when they're not regulated taking that stuff for granted and trying to and overstepping boundaries that aren't discussed, that shouldn't necessarily need to be discussed if that is someone that you have love for. Because if I my definition of love is an intimacy pact. So if I have an intimacy pact with you, it shouldn't it shouldn't be broken because it's not necessary. Like, sure, you might slip up and I'm going to address it, but if you can't respect my boundaries, then we're going to have a problem. So, going from kind person to straight up, I have boundaries and you don't get to disrespect them ever again is a big shift. So, me telling him that the child support payments are heads up, the child support payments are going up. I texted him this maybe last week at like 5 a.m. one day when I was doing my budget because their summer camp is $500 a week. He said he doesn't want them this summer. He'll see them next year. So he won't see them he won't see them until next year, next summer. And I'm supposed to just be like this kind person that's like, oh, yeah, you did good for 6 months. So, yay. Now, in that 6 months, here's what I learned. He can absolutely afford to pay more. He just doesn't want to. He would rather, I don't know, do something else. Even though his children need to be invested in while they're alive, so that when they do gain these assets that he's trying to give them, they can sustain them. And if anyone should know that, it's him. I guess he's just relying on me and my tactics to get them there based on my pay and income. And I feel like that's so ridiculous. I feel like that's so ridiculous, especially when he only plans to see them sparingly. So I appreciate so deeply his conversation and understanding of taking someone's kindness for granted. And then I also appreciate my understanding of myself and the codependency that I had and realizing how silly or even dumb it is to be codependent when you could be taken care of as an independent person, knowing your needs. Like, hey, I need more. I need more child support money. So you're going to pay more child support money. Raising young kids is so easy because all you do is play. You learn through play. You send them to school. They socialize. But when they're 10 and up, it's like, okay, well, now they need this sense of responsibility because now they're moving into um, their adulthood. I'm well aware of that. It's just I had to grow up. So I was telling my grandmother, like, yeah, it's time to grow up. And she was like, yeah, don't let the kids beat you. And I had to say that I wanted to mention that on this podcast because I feel like that should resonate for a lot of people listening. Don't let the kids beat you. And for people that are single parents or not, that are raising children and are the custodial parent and are seeing that the child's other parent is fine and can pay more in child support, do it. Don't be dumb. I was told before the pandemic by the wealthy side of my family to that know him. They know him to raise the child support. They were like raise the child support. And for some reason I was choosing kindness. And it's really weird to switch from choosing it's really weird for the people receiving for you to switch from kindness to match their wildness. But honestly, you might it's better early than never. Do it early. Do it early. Do it as soon as you get the hunch. Do it now. Let him step his game up for himself and his children because just because the relationship didn't work doesn't mean his children shouldn't be successful. I'm glad he felt the urge to invest in himself and our children for their future, um, but he should invest in them now also so that they can, again, sustain that. Because if they have 12 houses and they don't have any common sense, or they were stalled at 10, 11 years old because of socializing in Detroit, Michigan, just a big different, it's a different world from what I had them in, I'll say. Sure, well rounded now, but that'll put a little bit of suspicion, or what does he have? Paranoia. It'll put a ton of paranoia on you. And this world requires socialization. So, yeah, that will not do if they're going to be able to sustain that future. All right, let's get into the book of virtues. I'm going to read off the 10 chapters, which are the virtues discussed in this book. This book is by William, what does that say? William J. Bennett. It's a Simon and Schuster book company, I believe, publisher. Um, they are self-discipline, compassion, responsibility, friendship, work, courage, perseverance, honesty, loyalty, and faith. So I'm gonna just go ahead and flip through the book. Actually, I'll just read the page that this picture's on. There is, I think this is a poem. This is encourage. There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is self unalive, that he must take himself for better, for worse, at his portion, that though the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through his toil bestowed on the plot of ground which is given to him to till. The power that resides in him is new in nature, and none but he knows what that is which he can do, nor does he know until he has tried. Not for nothing, one face, not for nothing, one face, one character, one fact makes much impression on him, and another none. This sculpture in the memory is not without pre-established harmony. The eye was placed where one ray should fall, that it might testify of that particular ray. We but half expressed ourselves, and are ashamed of that divine idea which each of us represents. It may be safely trusted as proportionate and of good issue, so it be faithfully imparted. But God will not have his work made manifest by cowards. A man is relieved and gay when he has put his heart into his work and has done his best. But what he has said or done otherwise shall give him no peace. It is a deliverance which does not deliver. In the attempt, his genius deserts him. No muse befriends him, no invention, no hope. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. Accept the place that divine providence has found for you, the society of your contemporaries, the connection of events. Great men have always done so, and confided themselves childlike to the genius of their age, betraying their perception that the absolute trustworthy was seated at the heart, working through their hands, predominating in all their being. And we are now men, and must accept in the highest mind the same transcendent destiny, and not minors and invalids in a protected corner, not cowards fleeing before revolution, but guides, redeemers, and benefactors, obeying the almighty effort and advancing on chaos and the dark. And then they have the poem The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. I'm going to encourage you all to look that up yourselves. But how fitting. How fitting is this to the topic of child support? Challenge yourself, sirs and ma'ams. Challenge yourself. I'm going to end this book with gratitude. I'm going to end this podcast episode with gratitude. I'm grateful for the endless opportunities that are available to all of us. I'm grateful for the beauty that is in our lives. I'm grateful for my children. I'm grateful